From Washington, Crossfire. The hosts for Crossfire, on the left, Tom Braden. On the right, Pat Buchanan. In the Crossfire, Gary Arnold, the GOP congressional candidate President Reagan told to shut up.
Good evening. He looks like Lennon and talks like Lincoln. That's the campaign slogan of our guest tonight, who achieved instant celebrity status this morning after having braced President Ronald Reagan yesterday right there in the East Room of the White House and winning from the president a rejoinder he had not used since this occasion in the campaign of 1980.
Oh, shut up.
My mother always told me that I should never say that, but this is the last night of a long campaign, and I've heard so many like him, I thought just once I could say it.
So, that was the first time, as so far as the record reveals, the first man whom Ronald Reagan publicly instructed to shut up. His name, alas, will go unrecorded in history. But the second man whom Ronald Reagan so instructed has become famous, as cable news network reporter Mark Walton here suggests.
There's hardly a campaign manager or briefing book that would recommend it, but if it's instant notoriety you want, national newspaper exposure, your name plastered across the screen, one politician's apparently found a way. Somehow get the President of the United States to tell you to
shut up.
And you're on your way. At the very moment 41-year-old Gary Richard Arnold elicited that now famous scolding, he hit the publicity jackpot. Cameras chased him, papers pasted his picture front page, and he even got invited on the big TV shows like NBC's Today. And when this nationally unknown California Republican congressional candidate thereafter held his own news conference at the stately National Press Club Forum for Presidents and Kings, you had to pry your way in to hear what he had to say, which was basically the same as what he said the other day.
Nobody that would say the things that he does would do the things that he's doing. There are two Ronald Reagans. I agree with the Ronald Reagan of what he says. I agree with 85–90% of what he says, and I disagree with 85 or 90% of what he does. It's as simple as that.
Old Shut Up, as Arnold's come to be known, is truly a political maverick. After a surprise win in last June's primaries, he is the bona fide GOP candidate in the 16th District of California. But he has no staff, runs his campaign out of a Santa Cruz mailbox, and has never received a nickel from the National Republican Party, which considers him a lost cause. Likewise, the local Republican headquarters has given up on Arnold, and because he is considered a positively sure loser, has given up on his race.
Philosophy is same as presented by the president, and Mr. Arnold has done nothing but attack the president and his policies. And therefore, we find it difficult to support him.
As for Arnold's firmly entrenched opponent, three-term Democrat Leon Panetta is just waiting for November 2nd, then hoping Arnold will go away.
He is really from the far, far, far right field, and so far out, I don't think he knows where home plate is.
Even though Arnold booked this room for his news conference back on Tuesday, the day before he went to the White House, he contends his outburst there was purely spontaneous and not designed to attract big media play. Whether that's entirely so is pretty hard to say, but one thing's for sure, Gary Richard Arnold has had one heck of a heyday. Mark Walton reporting for Crossfire.
Okay, this is the tail end of that heyday, and we've got Gary Richard Arnold right here, and you've gotten your $1 million worth of publicity this morning. Serious question, did you get it by being rude to the President of the United States?
No, I think what I'm doing is putting the word representative, making that meaning a little more accurate. We've got a lot of people in Congress. We had a lot of people that were parading around like Boy Scouts and giving the dog and pony show, which was referred to in the New York Times today. Mm-hmm. We were invited, but at our own expense, to attend and carry.
Did he ask you to speak, or did you just get up and let him have it?
I received an invitation from the President to attend that day to be able to talk to Cabinet.
Did it say Gary Richard Arnold will be speaking, and Ronald Reagan will be speaking, and Secretary of the Treasury Reagan will be speaking, or did you just stand up and say, just a minute, I want to interrupt the proceedings and let you know what's going on, Mr. President?
The invitation was to be able to carry on court and to be able to ask questions of the cabinet, the political strategist of the Republican National Committee. What happened was when Reagan came into that particular instance, he was addressing the newspaper press, not those particular delegates and nominees from across the country.
And you saw the cameras going, and so you said, "Just a minute, Mr. President," you interrupted him, right? Was that discourtesy on your part? Okay, a lot of people disagree with the tax thing, but weren't you discourteous to the president?
No, I think what the president did was discourteous to the American people. When you have somebody that manufactures your own statistics, and I'm embarrassed by the leader of the Republican Party that does that.
Well, let me explore.
Just like my opponent, the leftist attorney that you saw on the television.
Yeah, but you're in the president's home. He invited
He created a budget.
You go into his home and
he created a fictitious budget in which he said he cut taxes, when really the president gave us the largest tax increase in the history of the United States.
Pat, let me get off the subject of manners for just a minute. Mr. Arnold, I've been looking over your recent press releases and some of your campaign material, and I find the following. You say that we are experiencing depression by design, and you blame what you call the Rockefeller-Reagan trilateral team, and you say this team has a master plan to surrender the sovereignty of the United States. I wonder if, do you intend to expose Ronald Reagan as Robert Welch once exposed Dwight D. Eisenhower as a leader in the conscious agent of the communist conspiracy?
Tom, no. As you probably know, the history of the Council on Foreign Relations, it was formed in Paris in 1919 with a mere 200 people.
I'm a member. I know a lot about it. It was founded by some people who disagreed with Woodrow Wilson and thought that we were giving away the store at Versailles.
Today it consists, as you know, of 2,000 of your colleagues in that particular group. And the arrangement...
Two are George Will and Bill Buckley.
That's correct.
What do you think now? What are you saying about the Council on Foreign Relations other than it's an establishment institution?
I'll tell you, when those people maintain the positions that they do, we've got 230 million Americans, and for them to succeed each other, whether it's in the Federal Reserve like Arthur Burns, William Chesney Martin, Paul Volcker, or whether it's the ambassador of the Soviet Union, or whether they're the college chancellors in California.
But what is the Council on Foreign Relations?
Well, wait a minute. Let me just say this. Do those people that you mentioned, that Pat mentioned, do you think that Bill Buckley and Volcker and some of the others that Pat mentioned and you mentioned, do you think that they do have a master plan to surrender the sovereignty of the United States?
The $4.2 billion Ford Foundation, which is made up of a majority of the Council on Foreign Relations, said that it is their objective, the president, Rowan, I believe it is,
the new president,
that said that their purpose is to so alter the United States that it would comfortably merge with that of the Soviet Union.
What do you mean, the Ford Foundation?
That's correct.
His name is Thomas. I don't think he ever said...
He's a black
That's Rowan. That's Gaither Rowan I'm talking about.
Oh, that was way back. But I don't think...
That's a long time ago. The Ford Foundation was then run by McGeorge Bundy. It's now run by a black guy who's taking all the money and putting it into the inner cities to the chagrin of some of the senior members of the Ford Foundation.
Well, in the state of California, are you familiar with a book called Economic Democracy?
Who wrote it?
It is the Mein Kampf of the Haydenistas in the state of California and throughout...
Tom Haydenistas?
That's correct.
From the People's Republic of Santa Monica?
You got it. And the city of Santa Cruz and cities throughout the state of California.
Well, what's Hayden got? He's running for the state senate now.
The Ford Foundation had supplied the monies for that book by Derek Shearer, who's the husband of the mayor of Santa Monica.
The book that's really backing them is the Jane Fonda workout book.
No, I'm talking about the plan, the Mein Kampf. It's important that the American people understand it. The Republican Party, the Republican National Committee, the so-called conservative leaders are not aware of this plan. All they have to do is turn the page and they can see exactly...
But what's Ronald Reagan got to do with Tom Hayden?
At the press conference it said itself, at the conference that the president held itself, you leveled two principal charges. First, that Mr. Reagan had called for a big tax increase, and second, that he'd sold out Taiwan. Now, I've heard that over and over this year from none other than my colleague, Mr. Buchanan, and I happen to notice here, you put out a newspaper which is called Out of the Sand. And on page 4, I see a column by none other than my colleague, Mr. Patrick J. Buchanan.
Look, I haven't endorsed this man, but I'm moving toward it.
Are you taking, is your politics really that of Buchanan?
Tom, this is a reprint of a, you're plagiarizing. This is a reprint of the Inquirer, Washington Inquirer, isn't it? It's the exact same print. Are you plagiarizing stuff out of Washington, D.C. newspapers?
I have a contract with the Washington Inquirer in which they send the negatives.
This is the same thing you get, Tom. You didn't even show me this.
Well, Pat, you're
got a plagiarism charge here.
I consider that the man you said was so rude to Mr. Reagan that you are his mentor. You get all this stuff out about how if we can just cut all the taxes, we'll have prosperity without inflation. And some poor little fellow running for Congress out in California picks it all up, gets himself national headlines, and who's to blame?
Tom,
take care of
one of the most important things. There's a gentleman from Waco, Texas. His name is Johnny Stewart.
Right.
He has put together what a lot of PhDs in political science and history and economics have not done. It's very difficult for people to plow through
Let me take a look at it while
several
you're
thousand books.
Okay.
This is a chart that he's making available free for people that send him a self-addressed stamped envelope.
I've got 25 copies of this chart. This is the Trilateral Commission Council on Foreign Relations chart.
That's correct.
It's been going around for years and years and years.
Yeah,
I hope your
real
viewers
comfort
have it.
is
I
Pat
hope they'll
Buchanan.
write Johnny Stewart in Waco, Texas
How
with
much
a
do you
self-addressed
pay
stamped
Pat
envelope.
Buchanan to write that stuff in your newspaper?
Well, look, now here you got all right, George Bush, Trilateral Commission, everybody knew that. We knew when Ronald Reagan picked him. Al Haig is gone. Stessel is gone. Casey's running, Casey's a conservative
I think
Republican.
I think what you're trying to do is to paint me into a particular corner. Here's Barry Goldwater. What do you think of Barry Goldwater? You think he's kind of wild, far out? Okay, he says, in my view, the Trilateral Commission represents a skillful, coordinated attempt to seize and consolidate the four centers of power: political, monetary, intellectual, and ecclesiastical. Now that's pretty strong. If you read his book with no apologies, he goes out there without any apologies. I have no apologies either. And I think the American people need
What is the Council on Foreign Relations trying to do?
We have to take a break.
Okay.
We really have to take a break. And when we get back, I want to ask Mr. Gary Arnold, the man whom President Reagan told to shut up, whether he sends a monthly check to Mr. Buchanan, or Mr. Buchanan, whether he gets a monthly check from Mr. Arnold.
One of the
Anyway,
problems is the money, Tom.
we'll be back right after this.
In spite of the tax increase, shut up. Look, in spite of the tax increase that we had to accept, we still have the largest tax cut in history.
Welcome back to Crossfire. We're talking to Gary Richard Arnold. He's the Republican candidate for Congress from California who was in that brouhaha in the East Wing of the White House with the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, yesterday. He's been all over the press today. He's closing up the day here on Crossfire. He also has a lawsuit, as I understand it, against the Republican National Committee and, I guess, the President for not giving you any funds from the Republican National Committee. Now, since Ronald Reagan raised most of those funds, what obligation has he got to give you funds from the RNC unless you believe in sort of Republican welfare?
Well, see, the President and the Republican National Committee, through a series of fundraising letters, appealed to those constituents in all 435 districts. I talked to dozens of other candidates yesterday in which had not received 1 cent from the Republican National Committee. Now, one of the most important things, Jack Nelson of the Los Angeles Times mentioned on May 23rd in an article, I jumped right up here. He says that Ed Rollins was talking about a hit list and the fact that the White House political office had a long memory and that it controls the political options of both the administration and the National Republican Committee. It says we know what they're saying back in their home district because we have a mechanism set up at the Republican National Committee.
Well, what is wrong with them giving funds? They raised them all. The President raised this money. National Committee, it's the National Committee, the GOP. He raised the money. What's wrong with him and his people saying where the money goes?
They're raising it, saying that they are going to support conservative candidates. Now, one of the
Well, I'd like
things
to give you
it's a part of a fraud on this, Tom, is the fact that they said that it was going to support conservative candidates. They used $500,000 and more to pressure the people, the press, and the politicians to support the $100 billion increase, which is the opposite of the 1980 platform, and it's the opposite of the Republican Party.
Let me get back
fraud.
to your quarrel with the president on ideological grounds. On another page of your newspaper, the page right after the, just opposite the page with Mr. Buchanan's thoughtful
yes.
Appraisals of American politics, you cite, you print a letter, which you cite with approval, signed by Jack Kemp, Barry Goldwater Jr., and others, and the letter says, quote, "Your administration," addressed to Ronald Reagan, "is conditioning the American people to the acceptance of communist victory." Now, do you want to explain to us how Mr. Reagan is conditioning us for the acceptance of communist victory?
Well, for instance, in the country of El Salvador, we had a free election in which they elected an anti-communist free enterprise Christian, de Abussant. It was our State Department that said, no, he cannot take that position. They replaced him with a crony of David Rockefeller, Alvaro something or other, an international banker. And the line, the direction from Rockefeller went right through, at that time, Haig, to Richard Burt, who's part of the Institute of Royal Affairs in England and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Do you think Rockefeller calls Reagan or Haig or somebody in the State Department and issues orders every morning, or how does this work?
Let me repeat this all the way down. It's a straight line. After that comes Thomas Enders, the man that oversaw the genocide in Cambodia. He was very quiet about that. Underneath him is Denton, where 1/3 of the Cambodians were killed by the communists when they took over.
Enders was not there. He went out with the Americans. You're saying an American State Department official was responsible for the genocide in Cambodia?
I'm saying that they were awfully quiet while the genocide was going on. Well, for instance, right now in Afghanistan, where there's been more than 5 million people killed, where children have explosives tied to their back and they're jumping on tanks, we're feeding the Soviets. We're sending them the wheat and the Americans are getting the shaft.
We're sending the Soviet soldiers in Afghanistan?
We're sending wheat to the Soviet Union. You can't run an army on an empty stomach.
Is that under the direction or under the orders of David Rockefeller?
If the people will send for that chart...
No, wait a minute. You supported Ronald Reagan.
You bet.
Ronald Reagan said in the Iowa primary that if he's elected, he will lift the grain embargo and sell wheat to the Soviet Union, yet you supported him.
I disagreed with him on that. I think that's wrong.
Well, I disagree on taxes, but I don't think Ronald Reagan's controlled by David Rockefeller.
Well, Ronald Reagan made the issue of the Council on Foreign Relations and Trilateral Commission an issue in New Hampshire and Florida. He accused Jimmy Carter of having 19 of those Rockefeller operatives in the office, and he said he would go in a different direction. He now has 83. Now, that's just one promise that he's broken.
Why are you against him meeting with the President of Mexico out in California?
Well, again, what's happened is the reason why the totalitarians in Poland have their foot on the people there is because we're supporting them with our tax dollars. Where Citibank and Chase Manhattan would have folded, where the communist government would have dropped, we went in there to bail them out. And
in other words,
we're
American banks are propping up communist governments.
Oh yes, and that's why Reagan is now sent down to talk to Mexico, to bail Mexico out.
Mexico's got economic problems. American banks have propped it up. Mexico's not a communist government.
Listen,
you don't think so?
You think Mexico's a communist government?
I think what Portillo did to wipe out the middle class, to steal that $9 billion that Americans had in the bank, to confiscate the $25 million that Mexicans have of real estate that they purchased inside the United States is an absolute money grab.
Can I just ask a final question, because I know we're running out of time, but you say in your campaign slogan, as Pat quoted it, looks like Lenin, talks like Lincoln. Can you give either one of us some memorable Lincoln-esque phrase which you've used in your campaign that we can ponder on during tomorrow?
Well, Lincoln wouldn't accept a nation half slave and half free, and I won't accept a world half slave and half free. I think, again, that we are the biggest institutors of Marxist success around the world. If we pulled away, it would collapse by itself. When you talk to people like Anthony Sutton, who a top Sovietologist from Stanford University, and he documents the transfer of technology. The wheat, the saving of Poland, the $4.2 billion that went down to Panama, for instance, that just wired back into Citibank.
Sounds a lot like Pat Buchanan.
Well, I don't disagree with what he's saying right there. I mean, he's accurate. There is grain, there is credit, there is technology going to the Soviet Unions, détente. Your friends?
I'll tell you one thing, for instance. I've got people. I have one of the highest retiree areas in the country. Our people, some of those people have to choose between eat and heat when it comes to winter. We're building power plants in communist Romania. This is not the time to do it. We have businesses failing with bankruptcy. We have people
let's keep the credit here.
Starving. You bet.
Okay, we've been talking with Gary Richard Arnold, and he doesn't have Mr. Braden's endorsement for Congress, but he's got mine even if he doesn't have Ronald Reagan's. Tom and I will be back in a minute. We're going to discuss his candidacy and his performance here tonight and his performance yesterday in the East Room, won't we, Mr. Braden?
We will, Pat.
We have a Tylenol taxation situation here, and we have a regular setting into the nation body politics.
Welcome back to Crossfire, where Pat Buchanan and I have been talking to the congressional candidate from California, Gary Richard Arnold, to whom President Reagan delivered the memorable words yesterday, "Shut up." Well, Pat, we've met tonight a believer in the conspiracy theory, and like Robert Welch, he's a very nice fellow.
Well, Tom, I didn't think you could do it. You could get onto this program someone who's the right of me, but I think the gentleman is. But I'll be candid with you. I thought he handled himself very well. You bumped him around pretty good with your questions. He showed a sense of humor, and I thought he had some good answers. I particularly liked, did you not agree, he came back very well when you asked him for a Lincoln statement and quote about half slave.
Well, yeah, he said
your
that he
jaw was down
like
to your
Lincoln.
chest.
I assume when a man says he talks like Lincoln that he utters some phrases which are reminiscent of Lincoln. All he did was quote Lincoln. I don't think that's particularly Lincoln-esque. But yeah, he's a very nice fellow, as Robert Welch was a nice fellow, the head of the Birch Society. I met him a couple times. The candy manufacturer, very nice fellow. But these fellows who believe in this conspiracy theory that David Rockefeller is controlling the thing, Pat, you've never gone that far, even though Mr. Arnold obviously appreciates your rock-ribbed rightness and prints you in his newspaper. Incidentally, are you going to look up and find out if he pays you?
No, I think we're going to let that one go, Tom. I'm delighted to have that, but I do hope, listen, I think there's some rough edges there, basic points. I don't agree much with about the Rockefeller theory, but I think it bears looking into.
All right, I'm Tom Braden on the left. Good night for Crossfire.
I'm Pat Buchanan on the right. Join us tomorrow for another edition of Crossfire.
If you would like to comment on tonight's program, please write to Crossfire, 2133 Wisconsin Avenue Northwest, Washington, D.C. 20007.
The mainstream candidate in this month's primary. With a flair for promotion that he calls psychological warfare, Arnold sailed to easy victory on a platform calling for the immediate invasion and occupation of Cuba and Nicaragua, and a passionate belief that David Rockefeller is working hand in glove with Marxist regimes to take over the world.
What I've done is I've fired some torpedoes, and I hit the mothership.
Arnold will face incumbent Democrat Leon Panetta in the November election. By law, the local Republican organizations have to support the GOP's candidate. But individual Republicans on the party's Santa Cruz County Central Committee have labeled Arnold an 8-ball and a political fruitcake, and publicly stated he hasn't a chance. They're more than a little upset that Arnold refuses to toe the party line behind President Reagan. In fact, Arnold is arguing there is no party line. He's devised an elaborate chart to support his charge that the entire two-party system is a hoax perpetrated on the American public by the 1,800-member Council on Foreign Relations and its political Rosemary's Baby, the David Rockefeller-controlled Trilateral Commission.
And they're the most powerful, the strongest organization in the world, in the history of the world. They're distribution is through the press, through the cabinets, whether it's Republican or Democratic administration. The names change, but the chain of command remains the same.
Until now, Arnold was known mainly through his eye-catching bumper stickers, which show the Soviet hammer and sickle and say, "Welcome to the People's Republic of Santa Cruz." Its only apparent purpose is to attract attention, because Arnold, who was active in the recent anti-rent control campaign in Santa Monica, obviously knows a good thing when he sees it. Gary Arnold says the Trilateral Commission Council on Foreign Relations conspiracy is the #1 issue in the election. Whether 16th District voters believe that or not, there's no doubt they'll see a lively campaign and face a clear choice in November. In Santa Cruz, I'm Tony Russomanno, KICU TV 36 News.
Orange County to be able to reflect those. Again, I think it's very dangerous. The only thing that the federal government controls completely is the District of Columbia. A woman can't walk the streets in the daytime. It's got the worst crime. Their education stinks. The federal government has no business in telling the American people on how to run their own communities. They do not have any constitutional requirement to balance a budget, whereas our cities and counties and states do. They ought to get the hell out of the various communities and let the people solve their own problems. Panel Council on the Federal Reserve was sold to our Congress by Nelson Aldrich, who is the paternal grandfather of Nelson Rockefeller. Today, Paul Volcker, chairman of the Federal Reserve, sits on the multi-million-dollar Rockefeller Fund, which is tax-exempt. In America today, a dictatorship is being built, and it's being done on a bipartisan basis through the Trilateral and the Council on Foreign Relations operatives. For a list of those that are in the press and in the Congress and in the Union, please contact my political headquarters and I'll send you a copy. There are many important issues to discuss, but the very ability to discuss those issues is being threatened, and your right to vote is being phased out. The Democrats, through their new so-called democratic reform, has 4 points, in which in effect tells the voter to go to hell. Number 1, they're against the proliferation of primaries. Number 2, delegates that are elected in primaries will no longer be bound on the convention floor for even the first vote. Number 3, the candidates have to go through peer approval so they don't have any opposition in the primaries, or they have to go through a screening process. Number 4, 500 delegates will be made automatically of incumbents such as congressmen. Americans are being sweet-talked out of their God-given rights by leftist attorneys and glad-handers and nice guys, out of those people that are part of the Democratic Party that I refer to as the Deathocrats.
In 1776, the Secret Order of the Illuminati was founded by Adam Weishaupt. The influence spread through the French Revolution, and even we had American presidents warning the American people. We had the heads of both Harvard and Yale mentioning the influence of the secret societies inside the United States at that time. In 1891, on February 5th, Cecil Rhodes formed a secret society, formed on models of the Jesuit Masonic organization. The English journalist that lived during that time, William Stead, wrote that Cecil Rhodes' program was designed to have like-thinking people, at least some 3,000 of them in the prime of their life, scattered throughout the world, mathematically selected, working towards the founder's purposes, world government. Frank Adelot, who also wrote about Cecil Rhodes, admits that Rhodes trainees occupy important positions in the Council on Foreign Relations, the World Peace Foundation, and the United Nations Association. The Fabian Socialists in England accelerated that plan for world government. Oxford University was under the domination of the Fabian Socialist Society. That is where the Rhodes Trust sent their scholars to be indoctrinated to be part of an international socialist government. Frank Adelot, writing about the Rhodes Scholars, said if one were to assimilate all the material from Oxford, one would return to the United States as citizen of the world. The deliberateness and the deceit can be seen by the Fabians' selection of their own name, which is after General Fabius, who believed in the gradualism, the salami approach in defeating the enemies. And also you see the stained glass window that was commissioned by the Fabian founders. It includes a wolf in sheep's clothing. Anne Besant, up in the right-hand corner, was a member of the executive committee of the Fabian Society in 1886. She was called one of the finest women orators and organizers of her day. In one of their publications called Track Number 3, they announced that their goal was socialism, and that same year, at their London conference, they paid tribute to Karl Marx. The lady in the lower left-hand corner is Blavatsky, and descent of the Fabian socialist, a Fabian socialist, took over the Theosophical Society from Madame Blavatsky, quote, to oppose every form of theology, especially Christian, unquote. This Fabian socialist and dissent was the co-editor of Lucifer and was the president of the Blavatsky Lodge and of the Fabian Society in India. Blavatsky follower Conan Doyle, the man standing in the center, was said in his Communicating with the Dead that William Stead said, quote, "We had looked into the eyes of Christ." Mentioning of Cronin, he says, he had looked into the eyes of Christ with Cecil Rhodes at his side, and that their work on earth was that holy and divine, and that his message was mine. Anyway, what we have here is a man that's saying that he's communicating with the dead, and that Christ's work here on earth is being done through Cecil Rhodes, and that Cecil Rhodes' work is really Christ, that building world government. The communist assassin, Sirhan, requested 2 books in the Los Angeles jail after killing Robert Kennedy. One was A Secret Doctrine by Madame Blavatsky. That is the text of the Theosophical Church. Blavatsky also wrote The Manual for Revolution, which calls for the assassination of national leaders. The New York Theosophical Church shares its chapel with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace of Alger Hiss fame. Robert McNamara, head of the World Bank, belongs to the New York Theosophical Church. Remember again that their purpose is, quote, to oppose every form of theology, especially Christian, unquote. Another of the intertwining secret societies began in the United States about 150 years ago. Their emblem is a skull and crossbones. It is called the Order. The primary spawning grounds is Yale University. It is the president of Yale, Kingman Brewster, who said, quote, "Our national purpose should be to abolish our nationality." Of course, he is selling world government, which the secret societies intend to run. According to Dr. Anthony Sutton, who is now in possession of some of their forbidden papers, claims the Order is the controlling brain for such groups as the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers, the Atlantic Union, and the Council on Foreign Relations. The Council on Foreign Relations, according to a book by U.S. Senator Barry Goldwater, is a vehicle for multinational consolidation of the commercial and banking interests by seizing control of the political government of the United States. He said that the Trilateral Commission is, quote, "a skillful, coordinated effort to seize control and consolidate the 4 centers of power, political, monetary, intellectual, and ecclesiastical." Those were the definitions given by the United States Senator Barry Goldwater in his book, With No Apologies. A book Ronald Reagan said was required reading for those that wanted to know the inner workings of the political world. The inner workings, knowledge of the inner workings, is essential to understand virtually all of human activity. There is no way to understand political or social activities at the local, state, or national, or international without understanding these 2 organizations, the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations. Woodrow Wilson and his Rasputin-like advisor, Colonel Mandel House, were wholly devoted towards the establishment of world government. The League of Nations was to be their framework of this scam and to grab for total world control. World government is a project of the super wealthy and the international bankers. They use their secret societies to manipulate citizens and movements towards their world government goal for total domination. Woodrow Wilson failed in his job in convincing the United States Senate into ratifying the League of Nations Treaty. So the super wealthy regrouped, and in 1919 in Paris, they met and formed an organization known in the United States as the Council on Foreign Relations. to so alter the American society that they could mold it for acceptance of their world government plan. Some excellent books and backgrounds of the secret societies surveyed over this period are still available. A number of Nesta Webster's books have been handsomely and inexpensively reproduced. Several books show a diagram of a fascinating web of money and power that projects from the early part of this century to the present. In a book called Who Rules America, the international banker's proxy, Woodrow Wilson, put into effect the income tax, which is part of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. The same super wealthy provided a way to escape taxation themselves. What they did was they set up a series of foundations in which huge portions of the funds are directed towards policy planning and opinion making. According to Santa Cruz professor William G. Domhoff, there are today over 77 foundations of over $100 million each. Half of these have interlocking trustees, and those with the greatest number of interlocks are the Russell Sage, the Rockefeller, the Carnegie, and Ford Foundations. The head of the Ford Foundation said that their purpose was to so alter the United States that it would comfortably merge with that of the Soviet Union. The foundations are the political and propagandizing backbone of the super wealthy. The Ford Foundation today is headed by Council on Foreign Relations member Thomas A. Franklin, or Franklin A. Thomas. Rhodes Scholar Hedley Donovan is a trustee. He is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and serves as a trustee on the Carnegie Foundation. Hedley Donovan is an example of one of those interlocks that we just described. Also, a trustee is Robert McNamara, who's a Ford trustee, a member of Rockefeller's Council on Foreign Relations, is head of the World Bank, which is part of the beginning of the foundation of this world government. McNamara is also a member of the super-secret Bilderberger Society, of which the order acts as a nervous system. And as we said before, earlier, McNamara is a member of the anti-Christian or anti-religious Theosophical Society. Contrary to one's first assumption, the monies of the wealthy... try that again. Contrary to one's first assumption, the monies of the wealthy conspirators surfaces in so-called anti-establishment organizations. We shall examine Santa Cruz on the California Central Coast, but the formula is used throughout the United States and throughout the world. We shall trace the funds of big oil and steel together with the monies from the foundations, where the secret slave society is the model. Paradoxically, those interviewed in Santa Cruz who believe they are fighting the establishment are not aware of foundation funding, and they are also unaware that it is the wealthy monopolists that are guiding and directing their efforts towards a world government. The Ford Foundation's front, the Fund for the Republic, has funded hundreds of thousands of dollars to the American Friends Service Committee. The director of the Fund for the Republic was Ed Levy, a member of the National Lawyers Guild, cited by Congress as the foremost legal bulwark of the Communist Party. Gerald Ford, who belongs to the secret Bilderberger Society, chose Ed Levy as the United States Attorney General. It was Ford also that chose Nelson Rockefeller as vice president. Before we get into this, it's important to restate. Karl Marx's enemy was the bourgeoisie, the middle class. Communism's goal is a dictatorship, a rule by the privileged few. Communism is not the people overthrowing the banking establishment, but it is the international banking establishment enslaving the people. The only reason for communism's success is because of the decisions made in London, Washington, D.C., and New York City, not Moscow, Peking, or Hanoi. The American Friends Service Committee was first organized in 1917 as a truly pacifist organization, but by the early 20s, Jessica Smith, part of the hierarchy of the organization, was liaison between communist agents inside the United States and the Soviet Union. Both of her husbands, John Apt and Harold Ware, were Soviet spies. Clarence Pickett, who in 1929 assumed full control of the American Friends Service Committee, was a member of the Emergency Civil Liberties Committee and the Russian-American Institute, which our Congress said was specializing in pro-Soviet propaganda And today, the American Friends Service Committee is the same. It still does. They, on the southern portion of the Monterey Bay, on the Central California coast, is the Asilomar Conference Center. This is the first-class conference center. It's a location where plans to communize America have been distributed to activists from across the nation. Most of those who mistakenly think they are opposing the establishments and its concentration as well. On the north end of the Monterey Bay, the American Friends Service Committee owns acreage in Santa Cruz County used to indoctrinate members and guests. Santa Cruz County Supervisor Gary Patton, one of the foremost fanatics for world government, his wife serves as the secretary to this front group for the Council on Foreign Relations. It was Clarence Pickett, who ran the American Friends Service Committee for several decades, belongs to the institute specializing in pro-Soviet propaganda. The sign tells us here that the Santa Cruz Quaker Center shares their facilities with the Center for the American Activities and Studies. This group supports the communist Sandinistas in Nicaragua and the communist terrorists in El Salvador. They're the ones that are blowing up buses and people and bridges and communication links in Central America. In the tiny city of Santa Cruz, on Curro Alley, is the headquarters for this Marxist group. They also house a pro-communist Latin American bookstore replete with posters giving the communist clenched fist salute, the sign of their terrorists and assassins. The bookstore's name is Venceremos, which was the rallying cry for Che Guevara and Fidel Castro, which literally translates to "We Shall Overcome." The song "We Shall Overcome" was written at the Communist Training School in Tennessee, the Highlander Folk School on Research and Education Center. Trilateralist Andrew Young was trained at the Highlander Folk School. The Subversive Activities Control Board found that the International Union of Mine, Mill, and Smelter Workers was communist infiltrated. They funded the Highland School, and they let Andrew Young live rent-free at the union's offices. Jack Pitts Odell, the National Party committeeman, worked with Andrew Young at one of the centers headquartered in Georgia. Hunter Pitts Odell has been Jesse Jackson's aide for the last decade. Jesse Jackson inherited the Marxist network organized under Martin Luther King. At the Communist Highlander Folk School, Martin Luther King was photographed by Tennessee authorities, seen here with Abner Berry, a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party. The person on the left is Miles Horton, a primary Marxist functionary. Mr. Nonviolent M.L. King wrote the foreword to a book called Negroes with Guns, urging them to arm for violence. Robert F. Williams, who was the author of the book, was a former NAACP organizer, was a friend of Martin Luther King. He also published in a newsletter that he published, quote, "Anti-imperialist forces of the Soviet camp are growing more powerful every day. We are learning from the people of Vietnam, of Cuba, and Algeria," unquote. And Robert Williams, broadcasting from Cuba, suggested a quote-unquote kill-in. It is the Ford Foundation financed Martin Luther King. That is the wealth that finances Jesse Jackson and his war against the small businessman. Only 1% of the businesses have over 500 employees. It is that 0.5% that dictates politics to the rest of the American people. We find that the super wealthy funding some of the most deceived people on earth. Members supporting Martin Luther King in this particular project is the NAACP, the National Lawyers Guild, the American Friends, the Women's League for Peace and Freedom, all working to alter the United States to become more like a USSR slave system. Let us trace the megabucks from the multi-million-dollar Carnegie Foundation. Realize that 50% of its trustees, over 50%, belong to the secret Council on Foreign Relations. The communist convicted Soviet spy Alger Hiss used to head this foundation. Secret Bilderberger Joseph E. Johnson followed Hiss's chairmanship. It was Johnson who financed a 170-page plan for the UN invasion of South Africa. imagine an endowment for peace offering plans for war. The forces Bilderberger Johnson supports are those forces giving the communists clenched fist salute. Remember, the communists are the proxies of the super wealthy, killing competition so that the super monopoly assumes power. Joseph E. Johnson is a trustee to the Aspen Institute. The Aspen Institute is the most scientifically created propaganda machine for the relinquishment of individuality in the United States. The Carnegie Foundation also funds the NAACP and the National Lawyers Guild, the foremost legal bulwark of the Communist Party. It is the super wealthy that fund communism. That's the big secret. It is designed to destroy the middle class and to create a slave system similar to that in the Soviet Union. In Santa Cruz, another outfit that cons people into supporting programs of the super wealthy is the Resource Center for Nonviolence, meaning violence is okay for the communist revolutionary regimes around the world, but not for those trying to resist communist terrorism. According to their own brochure, their staff is interchangeable with the Fellowship of Reconciliation and the War Resisters League. Their European affiliate is a front for the Communist Party. The Resource Center for Nonviolence is a major transmission belt for Marxist and communist propaganda. They provide films by Paul Jacobs, who was a Trotskyite and a member of the Young Communist League, and they promote George Lakey, a member of the War Resisters League, who agitated on behalf of the Marxist Black Panthers. The Nonviolence Center promotes the Disarmament and Surrender Syndrome film by Eric and Ian Tierman, The Last Epidemic. It is in line with the Soviet Active Measures propaganda program. The Fellowship of Reconciliation, whose so-called nonviolence center says their staff is interchangeable with, in one of their brochures, says, instead of attacking the Soviet Russia, we are anxious to appreciate their contributions to build here in this section of the world